By the time anyone thought to intervene, it was already over. Elvis Presley remained seated, watching in silence as a man twice Bruce Lee's size stood motionless, no longer advancing. No punches were thrown in anger. No shouting followed. Those nearby would later struggle to explain what they had just seen, only that the challenge ended almost as soon as it began, and that Bruce Lee never raised his voice. Whatever happened in those seconds did not look like a fight, yet the message was unmistakable. From that moment on, the room treated Bruce Lee differently, and so did the men who thought strength alone decided outcomes. Graceland in the early 1970s did not feel like a fortress. Despite its reputation, the house often functioned more like a gathering place than a stronghold. Music drifted through open rooms, conversations overlapped without urgency. People moved freely, familiar with the rhythms of Elvis Presley's private world. There were no cameras, no stage lights, and no expectation that history was about to take place. Bruce Lee arrived as a guest, not an attraction. He was known to some in the room, but not in the way legends are known later. At that time, his reputation existed in fragments: martial artist, instructor, actor, thinker. To many present, he was simply a smaller man with calm eyes and an unassuming posture. He did not command attention when he entered. He did not attempt to. Those who later recalled the moment often mentioned his stillness first. While others leaned into furniture, spoke with their hands, or laughed loudly, Bruce Lee remained composed. He listened more than he spoke. When addressed directly, he answered briefly and without emphasis. There was no effort to explain who he was or what he could do. In that environment, such restraint was easy to overlook. Elvis, seated nearby, held court in his usual way, relaxed, observant, aware of every shift in the room without needing to control it. His presence set the tone. Around him were musicians, friends, and members of his security team. The hierarchy was understood without being stated. At the top sat Elvis. Close behind stood the men whose role was protection, their authority derived not from conversation but from physical presence. Among them was his largest bodyguard. His size was not incidental, it was his qualification. At over 300 pounds, he occupied space effortlessly. People moved around him rather than past him. His confidence did not need reinforcement. In rooms like this, his role was never questioned. Bruce Lee remained on the periphery, not physically distant, but socially quiet. He observed the layout of the room, the spacing between people, the subtle cues of dominance and familiarity. It was not analysis in the academic sense. It was habitual awareness, the same awareness that guided how he stood, where he placed his hands, and how he carried his weight. No one yet sensed conflict. The atmosphere remained informal, but in rooms governed by unspoken rules, contrast creates tension. A man built on mass and certainty sharing space with one defined by restraint and precision creates a quiet imbalance. It does not announce itself, it waits. By the time the first remark was made, casual, dismissive, framed as curiosity, the conditions were already set. The environment had done its work. The witnesses simply did not realize it yet. The bodyguard's authority was not expressed through words. It never had to be. In Elvis's world, protection was a visible concept. Large men, constant proximity, a readiness that did not need to be demonstrated to be believed. The largest among them carried that expectation most clearly. His size alone answered questions before they were asked. He had earned his position through reliability and presence, not public confrontation. When strangers grew too close, he stepped forward. When voices rose, he positioned himself between them. Over time, that role hardened into identity. In rooms like Graceland's living area, he was accustomed to being the physical boundary others respected instinctively. Bruce Lee did not fit neatly into that order. He did not challenge it either. He moved without seeking permission and without demanding attention. When he crossed the room, people adjusted without knowing why. His steps were light, deliberate. He did not avoid the bodyguard's space, nor did he intrude on it. The balance remained neutral. Witnesses later described the moment when attention subtly shifted. It was not triggered by action, but by contrast. The bodyguard noticed the absence of deference, not disrespect, something quieter. Bruce Lee did not acknowledge size as a factor. He addressed the man as he would anyone else, with directness and without hesitation. This was unfamiliar territory. In most interactions, the bodyguard's presence set the terms. Conversations slowed around him. People measured their distance. Bruce Lee did none of that. He spoke when spoken to, listened when others spoke, and returned to stillness when the exchange ended. There was no challenge in his tone, yet no concession either. Authority, when untested, often seeks confirmation. It does not always announce that need openly. Sometimes it emerges as curiosity, sometimes as humor. A comment was made about martial arts, light, almost dismissive. Another followed, more pointed. Laughter rippled briefly through the room, not cruel, but expectant. Bruce Lee did not respond immediately. He allowed the words to settle. He did not smile to deflect them, nor did he harden his expression. He remained attentive, as though the remarks were part of the environment rather than directed at him. This restraint unsettled more than confrontation would have. The bodyguard's posture shifted, not aggressively, but with interest. He turned his shoulders fully now, giving Bruce Lee his attention. To the observers, it appeared casual. To those attuned to such dynamics, it marked a transition. The roles in the room were no longer static. Elvis noticed. He said nothing, but his gaze lingered. He had seen many displays of confidence, many attempts to assert dominance in subtle ways. This felt different. The exchange had not yet become a challenge, but the path toward one was clear. By then, the room had quieted slightly. Conversations at the edges softened. People sensed that something was forming, though no one could have explained what. Authority had been acknowledged without being accepted. And in that quiet refusal, the balance began to shift. The moment did not arrive abruptly. It unfolded in increments, each one small enough to be dismissed on its own. Another remark was made, this time no longer disguised as curiosity. It carried a note of challenge, framed lightly but directed clearly. The bodyguard's voice was steady, confident, accustomed to being heard. What mattered was not the content of the words, but where they were spoken. This was no longer a private exchange. The room was listening now. A few conversations stopped altogether. Others continued at a lower volume, their participants aware that attention had shifted. Bruce Lee turned fully to face him. The movement was unhurried. He did not square his shoulders in preparation, nor did he adjust his stance in any obvious way. He simply aligned himself with the speaker, offering his attention without ceremony. Those who watched expected a verbal response, perhaps an explanation or a deflection. None came. Silence followed. Not the awkward silence of uncertainty, but the deliberate pause of consideration. Bruce Lee allowed the challenge to exist without acknowledging it directly. In doing so, he changed its nature. What had been an attempt to assert dominance now hung unresolved, waiting for a response that did not arrive. The bodyguard filled that space instinctively. He stepped closer, not aggressively, but with familiarity, as though proximity alone would re-establish order. His size altered the geometry of the room. People leaned back slightly, creating distance. This was the posture they recognized. Bruce Lee did not retreat. He did not advance either. He remained where he was, his weight evenly distributed, his gaze level. There was no visible tension in his frame. To the untrained eye, he appeared almost passive. To those watching closely, the lack of adjustment was its own statement. Someone laughed, uncertain. Another shifted position to get a better view. Elvis remained still, observing without interruption. In his house, challenges were rare, but they were not unheard of. He understood when to let moments resolve themselves. The bodyguard spoke again, this time more directly. The words carried expectation, an invitation or a provocation depending on how they were received. In public settings, such moments typically end one of two ways, with withdrawal or with escalation. Bruce Lee chose neither. He responded with a short acknowledgement, calm and unembellished. No bravado, no refusal, just enough to signal that he understood the implication. The tone did not match the challenge. It did not rise to meet it. It remained level. That imbalance shifted the atmosphere. The challenge could no longer be dismissed as casual conversation. It had been answered without being accepted. In front of witnesses, that was enough to cross a line. From that point on, the outcome would unfold without hurry. The room had already taken note. Whatever happened next would not be a performance. It would be a demonstration, whether anyone intended it or not. What followed was not movement, but restraint. The space between the two men remained unchanged, yet it carried new weight. Those closest later recalled the sensation that time had slowed, though nothing outwardly dramatic occurred. No one raised a voice, no one stepped in. The room waited. Bruce Lee did not prepare in the way people expected preparation to look. He did not widen his stance or lift his hands. His posture remained relaxed, almost conversational. Yet there was a subtle completeness to it, as though nothing needed to be added or removed. He appeared finished, ready in the sense that nothing further was required. The bodyguard, accustomed to reading physical cues, found none. There was no tension to mirror, no aggression to counter. His own presence, usually enough to draw a reaction, met only quiet attention. He adjusted his footing slightly, a habitual movement meant to anchor himself. Bruce Lee did not respond to it. Witnesses later struggled to describe this interval. Some estimated it lasted only seconds. Others believed it stretched longer. What they agreed on was the feeling of inevitability. The exchange no longer seemed open-ended. It felt decided, though no decision had been announced. Elvis leaned forward slightly in his chair. He remained silent, but his focus sharpened. He understood showmanship and confrontation, and this was neither. Whatever was unfolding did not seek approval. It did not require an audience. The presence of witnesses was incidental. Bruce Lee's gaze did not harden. It was not a challenge. It simply stayed where it was, attentive and neutral. In that stillness, he communicated something difficult to articulate, that the outcome did not depend on force or even on intention. It depended on timing and alignment, already settled. The bodyguard spoke once more, a final attempt to draw movement, to elicit reaction. His words carried less certainty now, more insistence. The room recognized the shift. Authority, when it senses erosion, often presses forward. That instinct was visible. Bruce Lee acknowledged the words with a slight nod, nothing more. The gesture was not dismissive, it was confirmed. Those who saw it would later say that this was the moment they realized the encounter had effectively ended, even though nothing had yet occurred. Silence returned deeper than before. The air felt held. In that pause, the distinction between power and control became apparent, though few could have named it at the time. What happened next would take very little time, but it would only be understood by first recognizing what did not happen in that stillness, and why that absence mattered. Those closest later agreed on one detail: it did not look like a fight. There was no wind-up, no visible exchange of blows, no moment where two forces collided in the way people expect confrontation to appear. The shift was subtle enough that some did not immediately realize anything had happened at all. Bruce Lee moved first, but only barely. A small adjustment of position, measured, precise, and economical. It was not a strike meant to impress. It was a correction, applied at exactly the right moment. The bodyguard's forward pressure met resistance where he did not expect it, redirected before it could fully form. What followed took only seconds. The bodyguard's balance changed. His weight, once an advantage, became something he had to manage. He stopped advancing. His posture stiffened, not from pain, but from sudden uncertainty. The confidence that had carried him forward moments earlier no longer had direction. Witnesses struggled to describe the mechanics. Some mentioned a hand placed briefly on the arm or shoulder. Others recalled a shift at the hips, a step that never fully landed. There was no agreement on details, only on outcome. The larger man ceased to be the one controlling the space. Bruce Lee did not pursue it. He did not follow through or escalate. As soon as the demonstration had served its purpose, it ended. His hands returned to rest. His posture relaxed as though nothing unusual had occurred. The encounter concluded not with dominance, but with finality. The bodyguard stood still, not stunned, not injured, but altered. He did not attempt to reassert himself. He did not speak. His eyes remained fixed forward, processing what his body had already accepted. The lesson had been delivered without explanation. Around them, the room remained quiet. No one applauded. No one laughed. The absence of spectacle left the witnesses uncertain how to react. This had not provided the release of a visible victory. Instead, it imposed reflection. Elvis did not stand. He did not comment immediately. He observed the bodyguard, then Bruce Lee, registering the contrast. What he saw was not aggression but control, applied briefly, then withdrawn without emphasis. Bruce Lee stepped back into the space he had occupied before. He did not scan the room for acknowledgement. He did not look to Elvis. He simply resumed his earlier stillness, as though the moment had passed without significance. For those watching, that was the most unsettling part. The demonstration had resolved the challenge completely, yet left no visible mark. The power of it lay in how little had been required, and how much had changed because of it. The room would not return to its previous balance, not because of what was done, but because of what had been revealed. The stillness that followed carried a different quality than before. It was no longer anticipatory. It was contemplative. People shifted their attention cautiously, as though unsure whether the moment was truly over. No one rushed to fill the quiet with conversation. The bodyguard remained where he was. His stance had not collapsed, but it no longer projected certainty. He did not test his footing or shake off the sensation. He stood upright, composed, and noticeably restrained. The absence of reaction was telling. In his world, authority was often reaffirmed immediately. Here it was quietly withdrawn. Bruce Lee did not watch him. He had already disengaged, his focus returning to the room as a whole. That lack of interest communicated more than scrutiny ever could. The exchange was complete in his mind. There was nothing left to address. A few seconds passed before anyone spoke. When conversation resumed, it did so tentatively, as though the room were recalibrating its volume. The casual ease that had filled the space earlier did not immediately return. People spoke with more care, glancing occasionally toward the two men without drawing attention to the fact. Elvis finally broke the silence with a simple remark directed to no one in particular. It was neither praise nor judgment. It served only to release the room from its suspension. Those who knew him understood the choice. By not framing the moment, he allowed it to remain what it was, a private demonstration witnessed by chance. The bodyguard nodded once, a restrained acknowledgement. He did not approach Bruce Lee again. He did not offer an explanation or an excuse. The shift in his demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. He had encountered a boundary he did not intend to test twice. Bruce Lee responded only with courtesy. When addressed later, he spoke politely, without reference to what had occurred. There was no attempt to control the narrative. His calm suggested that the event did not require interpretation or reinforcement. As the afternoon continued, people adjusted unconsciously. Space around Bruce Lee opened differently now. It was not fear that motivated the change, but recognition. He was no longer simply a guest with an interesting background. He had been reclassified, though no one said so aloud. The encounter did not become a topic of immediate discussion. That, too, was significant. Loud victories invite retelling. Quiet resolutions settle deeper, shaping behavior without announcement. By the time the gathering moved on, the lesson had already taken hold. It did not depend on memory or exaggeration. It existed in the silence that followed, and in the choices people made afterward without realizing why. The incident did not leave Graceland with anyone announcing it. There were no raised voices afterward, no dramatic retellings that night. People departed as they usually did, carrying fragments of the afternoon with them, uncertain which details would matter later. What had occurred did not feel like a story yet. It felt unfinished, as though meaning would be assigned only with time. In the days that followed, the moment surfaced indirectly. A remark made in passing. A pause when Bruce Lee's name came up. Those who had witnessed it struggled to explain what they had seen without resorting to exaggeration, and most avoided trying. When pressed, they tended to focus on the outcome rather than the action. A challenge had ended. Authority had shifted. Nothing more was needed. As the story moved, it changed shape. In one telling, the emphasis was on size, in another, on restraint. Some remembered the bodyguard stepping back, others remembered him simply stopping. The mechanics blurred quickly. What remained consistent was the tone. No one described the event with excitement. It was always recalled quietly, almost cautiously, as though speaking too loudly might misrepresent it. Within Elvis's circle, the lesson traveled faster than the details. New visitors were introduced to Bruce Lee with a different inflection. Security staff adjusted their posture around him, not out of fear but out of respect. The largest bodyguard remained professional and composed, but his earlier certainty was tempered. He did not seek further tests. Outside Graceland, the story filtered into martial arts circles in Los Angeles. There it joined other accounts. Similar in pattern, different in setting. Public challenge, minimal response, lasting effect. Each retelling reinforced Bruce Lee's reputation, not as a fighter seeking validation, but as a practitioner unwilling to waste effort. Bruce Lee himself did not contribute to the narrative. He neither confirmed nor denied the accounts. When asked indirectly, he redirected the conversation or answered in general terms about efficiency and control. He allowed the stories to exist without ownership. This restraint shaped how the incident was remembered. Without a definitive version, listeners focused on the implications rather than the spectacle. The absence of clear detail became part of the power. If something could not be easily described, it could not be easily dismissed. Over time, the event at Graceland became less about a specific confrontation and more about a pattern. It aligned with other moments witnesses had observed, moments where challenges ended quietly and reputations shifted without noise. By the time years had passed, the story had settled into something closer to legend. Not because it grew larger, but because it remained unresolved. It left space for reflection, and in that space, its influence endured. Years later, the moment at Graceland continued to echo, not as a tale of triumph, but as a quiet demonstration of principle. Those who had been present recalled it not for the challenge itself, but for what it revealed about presence, perception, and control. Bruce Lee's actions, or deliberate lack thereof, left a lasting imprint on the men who thought they understood authority. The bodyguard's career continued without interruption, yet observers noticed a subtle change. He no longer assumed that sheer size could resolve disputes automatically. Decisions were measured more carefully. Physical dominance remained a tool, but one tempered by awareness. In private conversations, he would reference the event indirectly, admitting only that some lessons could not be taught with words. For Bruce Lee, the incident became part of a larger narrative he carried quietly. It reinforced a method he had always followed. Minimal action, maximum clarity. He did not need to prove skill or assert control. Efficiency, restraint, and timing achieved the outcome without spectacle. It was a demonstration of psychological authority, how presence alone could shift perception, resolve conflict, and reorder expectations. Stories of that day circulated slowly, intentionally, preserved in fragments. When shared with other students or martial artists, the emphasis was never on confrontation, but on observation. Witnesses recounted not the movements, but the decisions, the calm assessment, and the absence of excess. The lesson was understood intuitively. Skill manifests most profoundly when it is applied sparingly, with intent, and without ego. Even Elvis's recollections remained measured. He never dramatized the moment. He did not describe it with hyperbole or fanfare. Yet he remembered the clarity of the shift in the room, the unspoken acknowledgement of authority, and the way quiet competence reshaped the space around it. Those details, preserved in memory rather than footage or publication, carried a weight that outlasted any immediate reaction. In the years that followed, the narrative of Graceland was retold selectively, often in hushed tones among those who valued nuance over spectacle. Bruce Lee's presence in the room came to symbolize more than skill. It represented a standard, not a standard of winning or intimidation, but of precision, timing, and mental acuity. The incident, though brief, exemplified a principle that would outlive the people and the moment itself. Mastery is often silent, decisive, and enduring.
The room may have returned to its ordinary rhythm that afternoon, but the legacy of that encounter persisted. It lingered in choices, in behavior, and in the quiet recalibration of expectations. In the private world of those who witnessed it, Bruce Lee had not only defended himself, he had demonstrated the subtle power of control, leaving an impression that would quietly shape how authority and respect were understood long after the cameras were gone.